Jake McWhiggen. And you say you have 5, you think you can do it 3?
Is that a challenge?
No, it's just a question.
I'll see what I can do. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jake McWhiggen. I represent the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We are the trade association for the firearms industry. We represent manufacturers, retailers, and ranges across the country with over 11,000 members. Here in New Hampshire, we obviously represent the larger manufacturers being Ruger and Sig Sauer here in New Hampshire, along with all the independent retailers and ranges. Unfortunately, universal background checks, as it's so called, is now back in the legislature here in New Hampshire. This is going to have a burden on many of our small independent retailers across the state, while at the same time they are being instructed by the law to ignore the federal laws and regulations and risk losing their license. Much of the way the bill is drafted would cause serious violations to be levied on the retailer by the ATF. Our retailers abide by very strict set of standards, federal standards, that govern how they must conduct business, which according to this bill, they are told to act differently as to what they are supposed to do. FFLs must maintain a acquisition disposition book and records on private firearms transfers and the federal background check, the Form 4473, for at least 20 years. Retailers and their FFL status could be jeopardized based upon the way HB109 is written. Obviously, the last thing the firearms industry wants is for a prohibited person to gain access to firearms. But this bill will do nothing to solve that. While many people, even in this room, may not agree with a position that the firearms industry has taken, but we have started a campaign, actually back in 2013, called Fix NICS. And what the Fix NICS campaign is to make sure that the appropriate records are in the system for when you do a background check. New Hampshire is one of the last states that is not complying with submitting the appropriate records, along with Wyoming and Montana as the other two. What do I mean by that? You could be involuntarily committed, going through the court process in New Hampshire, and still pass a background check. So you can expand background checks, do as much as you want with the background. I can continue.
Oh, sorry.
Get it off, I'm sorry.
You can do as much as you want on background checks, but if you have the wrong data in there, our retailers, when they conduct a background check, are not confident that that firearm is being transmitted or given to an individual that is not prohibited. New Hampshire, like I said, is one of the final 3 states that have not done that. Since 2013, NSSF Fix NICS campaign has passed legislation in 16 states. We have increased the number of mental health records, essentially those who have been involuntarily committed, by 220% to over 5.3 million, up from 1.7 million in December of 2012. I continue to hear that if we save one life, one person, it's worth it. Unfortunately, based upon U.S. Department of Justice statistics, less than 8% of criminals are accessing their firearms from a retail store. And the industry itself has a program called Don't Lie for the Other Guy, where we train our retailers to spot straw purchases. That means when an individual comes in to purchase a firearm for someone who is prohibited. We train our retailers, we put them through various seminars to spot that sort of situation. But based upon these Department of Justice statistics, over 80% of federal inmates are gaining their firearms through illegal means. Does that surprise anybody here? They're criminals. But at the same time, those 80% are already prohibited from owning a firearm. So once again, they are ignoring a law and going and either stealing it or gaining it from the black market. And lastly, the federal government is not prosecuting those who do, in fact, fail a background check when illegally attempting to purchase firearms. We have retailers make calls to ATF, to local law enforcement, saying, listen, I've got the 4473, I have their address, I have everything that they tried to do, yet they're not going after those people and doing what they're supposed to be doing by them breaking the law. So will a universal background check change anything? No, it won't. Industry-led campaigns such as Fix Nicks, Don't Lie for the Other Guy, and other national efforts, which we are just partnering with suicide prevention. That was brought up earlier by the Medical Society. We realized that by training our retailers to maybe spot situations, to give them basic materials to make calls or a suicide prevention hotline, that's another step that we're taking as an industry to hopefully avoid that. You know, we have people up here quoting statistics, and you know, the number was 40,000, gun deaths a year. Well, you were correct. It's basically 22,000 of those are suicides, and 13,000 are homicides. We have a situation, and that is based upon the CDC statistics. We've had 70,000 drug overdoses in the United States. Once again, Center for Disease Control. And last year, over 250,000 medical malpractice deaths from Johns Hopkins. I think that number could be as high as 400,000. So I'm not sitting here comparing numbers, but when somebody comes up here and basically miscalculates, misquotes statistics, I want to set the record straight with that. And lastly, I continue to hear it from sponsor after sponsor about automobiles and driver's licenses. Automobile and driving is a privilege. The Second Amendment is a right. I thank you for your time today. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Also, I do have written testimony, and I will be here for the bill after. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. Could you tell me why New Hampshire is not in your program?
Which, well,
Which what?
no. So the Fix Nicks program over the years, and I'm going to be completely honest, and there will be people in this room that agree with me and don't agree with me. There are some states that have not provided those records because, let's take some of the western states. They think it's a states' rights issue, and we should not be providing those records into the federal system. You come to some of the states on the East Coast where we've had some difficulties doing it, and then you have those within the mental health community that says we should not be submitting those records to the NICS system. So it's basically two courses. Sometimes you have those on the, let's say, far right or states' rights issues that are fighting that, as well as those within the mental health community fighting it as well. So New Hampshire has kind of been a little of both on that issue, as you can imagine. We are not looking to expand categories of prohibited persons. All we simply want to do is those individuals who are federally prohibited from owning a firearm are in that system. And that's essentially why we started that Fix Nicks campaign in 2013.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative General, I just asked the question I was going to, but I did have a second question. So the second question was, what do gun companies, manufacturers, what do they look in to a state that they want to expand in or that they want to move to and create jobs?
Representative Burke, thank you for the question. Through the chair, we see more and more companies going to states that are obviously offering economic incentives, tax benefits, and obviously a wonderful environment for them to conduct their business in. So in the Northeast, we are seeing more and more companies, unfortunately, not necessarily leaving, but not spending any more capital and not investing in any of these states and moving to states where they're a little bit more accepted. We have a situation with Beretta. They're in Maryland. They basically no longer manufacture in Maryland. They have moved most of their manufacturing to Tennessee. We have companies in upstate New York. Everyone in here in the room will know who it is. They are unfortunately not spending any more capital in New York State. They are deciding to spend it in different areas. So as you continue to encroach on that Second Amendment, it makes it more and more difficult, like big manufacturers here in New Hampshire, to want to continue to stay in New Hampshire while they have other facilities in other states where they could transition that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. I have written testimony.
Yes, please give your testimony questions to the
Thank you, Chair.
Truck TV.